Hello and welcome to Autism Ontario's webinar, Getting the Most Out of Your ABA Program, a guide to evidence-based behavior services in Ontario. My name is Susanna Miller and I'm the Education and Workshop Coordinator with Autism Ontario. We are joined today by three representatives from the Ontario Association for Behaviour Analysis, or ONTABA. Please join me in welcoming L.Campbell, J.Koudys, and C.Zorzos. Before we get started, there are a few housekeeping items I would like to mention. This webinar is audio only, so you should be hearing my voice and seeing the slide in the center of your screen. To the right of the slides, you should see a resource section where you'll be able to download the slides from this presentation, as well as some additional resources that will be referenced throughout the presentation. To the left of the slides is the question and answer box. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, you can type it into this box, and at the end of the presentation, there'll be a question and answer period. Please note that we may not have time to answer every question. So, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to C.Zorzos.
Hello, my name is C.Zorzos. I am Chair of the ASD Task Force for the Ontario Association for Behaviour Analysis, or ONTABA. Today, I'm going to provide an introduction to the Ontario Autism Program. You will see references at the bottom of your slides and a list of websites where you can access the materials at the end of the presentation. The Ontario Autism Program provides services for children and youth up to age 18 with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. These services are flexible, individualized, and family-centered, and are based on a clinical assessment of your child or youth's needs. They are not defined by your child or youth's age or severity of their ASD. They also include behavioral services that are evidence-based and integrate best research evidence into the decision-making process. And they integrate input from your child, youth, family, and other professionals working with your family. So how do you know if your services are evidence-based? Your clinical supervisor will recommend evidence-based behavioral services using the results of scientific research, their clinical expertise, and guided by your family's goals and values. Some of the tools they may use are studies in peer-reviewed journals or large-scale reviews that evaluate numerous studies over time. Some of the more recent large-scale reviews include the National Autism Center, the National Professional Development Center, and the OSET-ASD Evidence-Based Practices for Individual with ASD. Literature reviews are regularly updated, and new findings should be incorporated into clinical practice as directed by your clinical supervisor. So how is the new OAP different than the previous Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA programs, and the Intensive Behavioral Intervention, or IBI programs? This chart summarizes some of the differences between the previous IBI and ABA programs under the Autism Intervention Program, or AIP. The important information to note is that while the previous ABA and IBI programs had pre-established or limited choices in goals and intensity and duration of treatment, the new OAP is more flexible. Goals are based on child, youth, and family input, in addition to your child or youth's areas of strength and need as determined by an assessment. Intensity, which is how many hours of treatment you receive, and duration, which is how long you receive treatment, is flexible and based on your goals and assessment results. There are 10 broad domains that your child or youth can target in the OAP. You can choose one or more of these domains to work on at a time. These include social and interpersonal skills, such as how to make friends and interact with others, communication skills, such as getting wants and needs met and having conversations, cognitive functions, such as problem solving, school readiness, including learning in a group setting and following routines, motor skills, personal responsibility and adaptive skills, including toileting, hygiene, and community safety, play and leisure skills, such as independent and cooperative play, self-regulation skills, including self-monitoring and self-management of behaviors, vocational skills, and challenging behaviors, including decreasing behaviors that interfere with learning and daily living. The process to identify your goals, services, and hours is outlined in this slide. Please note that I will review the clinical process here, but that all families will have access to other supports in the OAP, including a family support worker and family services and training that are outlined in a family service plan. More information can be found on the MCYS OAP information sheet, which is located on the MCYS webpage. So after your spot becomes available in the OAP, you will choose who you want to deliver services. This can be through the direct service option, where you can access services through your regional program, or a direct funding option, where you purchase services from a qualified clinical supervisor and team. Once you have chosen your provider, they will complete an assessment. They will start by asking you questions about your child or youth and family to get a better understanding of their strengths, areas of need, and assist in developing goals that align with your family service plan. Your team may also complete a curricular assessment, which is a direct observation and recording of your child or youth's skills in relation to specific skills outlined in the curriculum. Different curricular tools include the Assessment of Basic Language and Learning Skills Revised, or the ABLES-R, the Verbal Behavior Milestones Assessment and Placement Program, or the VB-MAP, and the Assessment of Functional Living Skills, or the AFLS. Your team may conduct a behavior assessment to gain more information about your child or youth's challenging behaviors. The team may ask you what the behavior looks like, specific triggers or situations when the behavior occurs, and how you and others respond to the behavior. Your team may train you to collect data at home or complete more structured assessments to understand why the behavior is occurring. With this information, your clinical supervisor will make a recommendation on how many hours of service per week is required to meet your goals, in addition to how many weeks are needed. This information is summarized in a behavior plan with treatment hours outlined in the budget template and an attestation completed to state that the clinical supervisor is following guidelines as outlined by MCYS and their professional credentialing or regulation body when developing and implementing your child or youth's program. This package is submitted to your single point of access, and funds are released within 30 calendar days. Recommendations are made in 6-month intervals, at which time your child or youth is reassessed and progress on goals is reviewed. Sometimes parents may not agree with the recommendations made by the clinical supervisor. In these cases, you should contact the clinical supervisor directly to voice your concerns. The clinical supervisor may provide several options at this point, including an internal review where another clinician in their agency reviews the plan and your concerns. If you are not satisfied with the outcome of this process, you may initiate the Independent Clinical Review Process, or ICR. The ICR process allows for components of a child or youth's behavior plan to be reviewed by an independent review committee. This committee is comprised of a registered psychologist or psychological associate, a board-certified behavior analyst, and a family representative who will share your concerns regarding the behavior plan with the review committee. Once all documentation is reviewed, the committee will either accept the plan or request the OAP provider to address specific areas of concern in a revised plan. If you cannot agree to a revised plan, you can request a second independent clinical review of the plan. Now I'll hand over to my colleague L.Campbell, who will speak about what good ABA programs look like.
Hello, my name is L.Campbell, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst and a member of the ONTABA ASD task force. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is, what does good ABA look like? So when deciding what good ABA looks like, we want you to keep in mind these guiding principles. So first and foremost, individuals and their families are integral partners in the decision-making process. Secondarily, interventions should be individualized to meet the unique needs of each individual with ASD and address the core symptoms of ASD. Also, we want to ensure that the amount of treatment and the setting is selected such that outcomes are maximized for the individual with ASD. And finally, goals should be set in advance prior to treatment. And so this is where your family service planning meetings are used to identify specific goals, define them in measurable terms, so that then we can use our data collection systems to monitor the progress and the outcomes of the intervention. Good ABA programs offer two models of service delivery: a comprehensive model of service delivery and a focused model of service delivery. I'm going to talk in more detail about each of these, but what's important to note here is that both models of service delivery offer opportunities for individualized one-on-one treatment, group-based treatment, and parent training. It's also important to note that the model of intervention is based on an individualized assessment. And so this is where the clinical team will do a file review assessments from other professionals, conduct an indirect assessment such as interviews and rating scales with key people in the individual's life, as well as direct observations of the child and youth in their natural environment, and ideally across environments. And we use this information to identify the primary needs, which then informs the intervention model that is most appropriate for meeting these needs. So let's look more closely at comprehensive intervention programs. So these are intervention programs that target a wide variety of developmental domains simultaneously. And as a result of targeting such a wide range of needs, we require a lot of time. So these interventions tend to be more intensive in nature, where the treatment hours are between 20 to 40 hours per week. In the province of Ontario, one commonly known comprehensive intervention program is the Intensive Behavioral Intervention Program. Initially, comprehensive intervention programs are delivered in a one-to-one format, where you have the ABA therapist working one-to-one with the child. But gradually, and sooner than later, we are going to incorporate small group-based intervention, because we know that comprehensive intervention programs will come to an end, and we need to prepare the child for their next learning environment, which will most often include group-based learning. So these interventions tend to be highly structured, but we are also incorporating more naturalistic teaching approaches where possible. Programming needs to occur in different settings. So if we look at a common setting for comprehensive interventions is a clinic or a center-based program. And we look at these programs, and oftentimes there are multiple treatment settings available within these clinics or centers, and programming should be occurring across varied settings. In addition, there are opportunities for family members to be involved in the intervention program with some training opportunities provided. So here are a variety of skill areas that could be targeted simultaneously in a comprehensive intervention program. What's important to note here is that the clinical supervisor and the clinical team will conduct an assessment to determine the primary needs across these skill areas, and then the clinical supervisor will develop a range of evidence-based procedures to teach these skills. It's also important to note that good ABA involves a systematic breakdown of these goals. So sometimes these skills are very, very complex, and so we break them down into smaller, more manageable steps for the child to learn. Finally, good ABA will also include strategies to enhance generalization. So what this means is we want to ensure that behavior change and skills that are being developed is occurring across a range of environments and in the environments where they're intended to occur. And so we want to ensure that interventions are being implemented across environments, and this is where we involve caregivers and collaborate with other professionals to ensure that this generalization happens. So here's a case example of a child involved in a comprehensive intervention program. So we have Alex. He's a 3-year-old child with severe symptoms of ASD. And as a result, he has a very limited communication repertoire. And he is not yet able to imitate the actions of others or dress himself, and he's not yet toilet trained. And so given the variety of needs and the complexity of this child, Alex received 25 hours of intensive behavioral services at a center-based program. So now let's look more closely at focused intervention programs. So in contrast to a comprehensive intervention program where we're targeting a wide range of skills simultaneously, focused intervention programs will target a limited number of skill areas. And we're still targeting socially appropriate behavior and reducing challenging behavior, but we're focusing more narrowly on perhaps 2 to 3 priority skill areas. In cases where the individual has complex needs, we may need to prioritize which areas that need to be addressed through treatment. Firstly, we look at the behavior, and if the behavior is such that it is threatening the health or safety of the individual or those in their life, this would be our first area that would require treatment. Secondarily, we look at the skills that the individual has, and if there are skill deficits such that the individual is not able to participate in their normal daily life and activities of their daily life, as well as there's no opportunities for increased independence, we would identify these as areas for treatment. In focused interventions, we see that there is a range in the number of treatment hours provided per week, and this range varies depending on the stage of intervention. So early on in intervention, when we're doing our assessment, we're designing our interventions, we're implementing our interventions, you will see that there are more direct hours of the ABA therapist working with the child or youth and their family, whereas when skills are acquired and we're working on the generalization of skills and the behavior is reduced, there would be less hours of intervention provided by the ABA therapist with the child or youth and their family. So here you can see the wide range of skills that can be targeted in a focused intervention program. So we have sleep hygiene, safety skills, leisure skills, and these are all skills that can be developed in a really focused intervention program. Focused intervention programs may also involve the reduction of specific problem behaviors. So we work on reducing self-injury, aggression, elopement, feeding disorders. What's important to note here is that good ABA will involve ongoing comprehensive behavioral assessments, and we use the information from those assessments to design specific intervention programs that address the specific reason why the behavior is occurring. And most often, if there's an emphasis on reducing a behavior, a good ABA program will also concurrently target skills to replace that behavior that was serving that particular purpose. So for example, if a child or youth was engaging in aggression and we determined that that aggression was serving the purpose of communication and that there was a skill deficit related to communication, we would have strategies that would address the aggression, but we would also be working on skill acquisition of appropriate communication to ensure that the child or youth is getting their needs met through communication training. So here's a case example of a focused intervention program. So we have Jade. She's an 8-year-old girl with ASD who's in school full-time in a regular class. However, she has historically been a very poor sleeper, and as a result of that, she's missing a lot of school, and when she's at school, she's not benefiting from that educational environment. So Jade and her family received support from an ABA therapist in their home, with the focus being improving sleep hygiene and the sleep routine. So now let's look at evidence-based group intervention programs. So group interventions are typically provided in two ways. One, we can involve typically developing peers who serve as peer models for the child or youth with ASD. Or alternatively, we will have individuals with similar diagnoses and similar age with similar need participating in the group sessions. One evidence-based approach that you'll commonly see in group-based interventions is behavior skills training, and this is where we identify a specific skill to target. We would provide specific instructions for that skill. We would model the skill with the group. We would allow the group participants to rehearse that skill and provide feedback to the participants when they're using that skill and practicing that skill. What's important to note is that good ABA programs that incorporate group-based learning need to ensure that there's a generalization of skills outside of the group sessions. So we would need to ensure that programming is happening in the child or youth's natural environment to ensure that skills are happening where they're intended to happen. Group-based interventions range in the number of treatment hours per week, but typically treatment is provided in blocks. So for example, it's common to see a group being offered for 2 hours per week for 8 weeks. A wide range of skills can be targeted in group-based intervention programs, and we see in particular that these skills that are being targeted address the core symptoms of ASD. So here's a case example of a group-based intervention program. So we have Jacob, and he's a 14-year-old youth with mild symptoms of ASD. He attends school in a regular classroom, but he does have difficulty in making and maintaining friendships, and this is important to him. And this is due to his significant social skills deficits. So Jacob participates in a peers social skills training group at a local center. And the PEERS program is a 14-week manualized evidence-based group intervention for youth with ASD. And part of this program is the involvement of parents so that they are able to promote the use of these skills outside of the group session. So parents are learning how to, say for example, prompt and reinforce specific skills during weekly homework assignments. Okay, now let's look at evidence-based parent training. So we know that an individual's progress with treatment is affected by the extent to which parents are involved in the treatment, and more importantly, the extent to which parents are trained. So it's important to ensure that intervention programs offer an element of parent involvement and parent training. In addition, we know that parents bring such a rich and unique perspective about their child to the treatment team. And finally, we know that parents in most cases are primarily responsible for the care and supervision of their child or youth. And so it's so important that they have the skills that they need to both manage the behaviors of their child, but to also teach skills to their child. Sometimes parent training is provided as a standalone treatment, but what I've demonstrated here for you is that good ABA programs, whether they're comprehensive or focused in nature, need to involve an element of parent training. We see that this training focuses on the skill development of parents and caregivers so that they have the ability to implement these intervention programs that are sometimes complex. And so what happens is that parents are supervised and coached through the implementation of these treatment protocols. So parent training can target a wide number of skill areas. So we see, most importantly, the generalization of skills that we've been talking about. We see adaptive skills training, so teaching those really functional life skills to children. We can incorporate some relationship building, etc. So here's a case example of parent training. So we have James, and James is a 6-year-old boy with ASD and an intellectual disability. His parents are struggling with getting him to school because he refuses to get dressed in the morning. And what happens is James will become very aggressive toward his parents and toward the family pet, as well as he will engage in self-injurious behavior. So James's parents are working with an ABA therapist during their morning routine, every morning, with the focus being on hands-on parent training so that they are learning, 1, how to manage James's behavior, and 2, how to teach James to get dressed so that they're able to get him off to school in the morning. So finally, let's look at locations of service delivery. So with both comprehensive and focused intervention programs, we see that these services are delivered across a wide range of environments. We have center-based, home-based, residential treatment facilities, schools, communities. But what's important to note here is that in order to ensure that behavior change is happening in the environments that it's intended to happen, we want to be sure that interventions are conducted across multiple settings with multiple people. So for example, if a child is predominantly involved in a center-based program, we will want to ensure that we're working closely with the home and with the school team to ensure that interventions are in place in those environments so that the child or youth is successful there as well. So that's all I have to say about what good ABA is. I'm now going to pass this over to Julie, who is going to speak to you about the OAP clinical team.
Hello, my name is J.Koudys, and I'm the chair of ONTABA's Jurisprudence Committee, the former chair of the Ontario Scientific Expert Committee for the Treatment of Autism Spectrum Disorders, also known as OSET-ASD, and I'm a member of the ONTABA ASD Task Force. Now that we've discussed the nature of the OAP and what good ABA should look like, I'll be sharing some information related to the roles, responsibilities, and qualifications of your OAP clinical team. We appreciate that it can be stressful for families to try to understand who the right people are to supervise and deliver their child's treatment. Hopefully, I can provide some helpful, practical information that will make it a bit easier for you to select professionals to support your child and family. One of the unique characteristics of ABA services are that they are generally delivered in what is called a tiered supervision hierarchy. What this means is that ABA services are predominantly delivered by a team, with each of the members of the team playing different roles with varying expertise and, perhaps most importantly, varying levels of responsibility. Many other services your child might receive are not delivered in this format. For example, your child might receive services from a speech-language pathologist or occupational therapist. This professional is often responsible for assessing your child's needs and designing and directly delivering the treatment. These services are often delivered for a limited number of hours per week. ABA generally looks quite different. First, ABA is often provided for more hours, ranging between 10 to 30 hours per week, although Laura discussed how there are other models as well. Next, ABA often involves many people. One individual may make decisions related to the selection of assessment processes and the design of the intervention. Then, once these decisions have been made, other individuals may complete the assessment and implement the intervention. By having a tiered supervision model, it is more feasible to offer many hours of service in an efficient manner. The exact tiered model of supervision that your child receives will depend on the nature of your child's needs and the complexity and intensity of the intervention he or she requires. Some children may receive services in a 3-tiered supervision hierarchy. At the top of the supervision hierarchy is the clinical supervisor, denoted in green here. This person's responsibilities and qualifications will be described shortly. Working under the clinical supervisor might be 2 more levels of frontline therapists, denoted in blue. First, there may be a senior therapist who is directly supervised by the clinical supervisor. Next, there may be ABA therapists who work directly with your child under the supervision of the clinical supervisor and the senior therapist. In this way, there are 3 tiers involved in the supervision hierarchy. Other children or youth may not require a 3-tiered supervision hierarchy. Rather, some children will receive services in a 2-tiered hierarchy involving the clinical supervisor who directly supervises the ABA therapist who works with your child. Both of these models have been found to be very effective, and the decision as to which model is appropriate for your child is made by the clinical supervisor, again, based on your child's needs and the complexity and intensity of their treatment. Now that you have a bit of an idea of how the clinical team works, let's talk in detail about each member of the team. There are specific qualifications for education, experience, and potentially professional registration or certification that are requirements for each team member, as well as some other very important practical requirements. Let's start by talking about the person who has the most responsibility in terms of your child's care, the clinical supervisor. The qualifications of the clinical supervisor are as follows. They must be professionally credentialed as either a board-certified behavior analyst or board-certified behavior analyst doctoral level, often referred to as a BCBA or BCBAD. This means they have completed the requirements to become credentialed, which involves graduate-level education, either at the master's or doctoral level, supervised training, and successful completion of a psychometrically validated knowledge exam. Alternatively, your supervisor may be a registered clinical psychologist who has completed extensive coursework in behavior analysis, again at the master's or doctoral level, and has extensive experience delivering and supervising ABA. In addition to these educational and professional requirements, clinical supervisors must have significant experience delivering and supervising ABA intervention for children or youth with ASD, more than 3,000 hours after the hours collected as part of their certification, and of these, more than 1,500 hours should involve supervisory duties. In addition, clinical supervisors must have an up-to-date vulnerable sector screening check, professional liability insurance, and through their registration or certification as a behavior analyst or psychologist, be required to adhere to a code of ethical and professional conduct. Parents can confirm their clinical supervisor's education and professional credentials by checking out the relevant professional association, either the Behavior Analyst Certification Board or the College of Psychologists of Ontario. As well, for further information on the qualifications of clinical supervisors, parents should visit ONTABA's website to review the Professional Association's recommendations. The clinical supervisor is the person who has the most responsibility on your child's team. They are responsible for all facets of your child's programming, including decisions related to initial and ongoing assessments, development of the behavior plan, and ensuring the behavior plan meets the expectations of the OAP clinical framework. They are also responsible for the accurate implementation of the behavior plan. This means that the clinical supervisor is responsible for all other members of the team, including senior therapists and ABA therapists, who I will talk about shortly. Clinical supervisors are also responsible for collaborating with family members as well as interprofessional partners. As such, he or she must directly observe the implementation of therapy and provide direct coaching and training to all frontline therapists and be in direct contact with your child and yourself, either in real time or through secure remote connections for distant supervision when necessary. Think of your CS or clinical supervisor as the team's coach or captain. They make all the higher level decisions. They provide guidance and structure. They provide support, coaching, and training. At the end of the day, he or she is ultimately responsible for your child's evidence-based behavioral services. The importance of the role of the clinical supervisor is further highlighted in the Behavior Analyst Certification Board's Practice Guidelines for ABA Services for Individuals with ASD. In this document, The assumptions within a tiered supervision model are highlighted. First, the clinical supervisor is responsible for all aspects of clinical care, again, including the activities of the frontline therapist. Next, the clinical supervisor must have knowledge of each member of the team's ability to carry out intervention activities. Finally, the clinical supervisor must be directly engaged with the treatment team, providing direct supervision to your child and therapist. Essentially, your coach must watch the players on the field. Finally, I want to make a brief comment on the ethical responsibilities of the clinical supervisor. As you can see, behavioral services are complex with many moving parts and players. In order to ensure that the services your child receives are safe, ethical, and comply with the OAP clinical framework, your clinical supervisor must abide by ethical billing standards, and they must engage in practices related to record keeping, consent, privacy, and confidentiality, which are consistent with ethical and legal standards in the province. Importantly, clinical supervisors must work within their boundaries of competence, meaning they only work with children and youth with whom they have the proper training and experience. They only provide services that they have been trained to provide. One way to know if your supervisor is working within their area of competence is to ask whether they've worked with a child who has needs similar to your child. Also, ask if they have worked with many children with needs similar to your child. Have they worked with children or youth within the same age range, with similar skill deficits or behavioral challenges? This ethical responsibility directly overlaps with the qualifications of the clinical supervisor and explains why completion of graduate-level training, registration or certification as a behavior analyst or psychologist, and extensive supervised practice is so important. Next, let's discuss the role of the other players on the team. In a three-tiered model of supervision, your child's team may also involve a senior therapist. This individual ideally has also completed the certification to be a board-certified behavior analyst or a board-certified assistant behavior analyst, and they have acquired minimum 3,000 hours of supervised experience delivering ABA services. Alternatively, this person may have not yet achieved this professional credential. However, they have acquired extensive experience, over 4,500 hours, delivering ABA under the supervision of a BCBA or registered clinical psychologist with extensive experience in ABA. Again, this individual should also have an up-to-date vulnerable sector screening, check professional liability insurance, and adhere to a code of ethical and professional conduct. Finally, let's discuss the ABA therapists, the individuals that directly deliver the behavioral services. These individuals have ideally completed some form of education related to applied behavior analysis, such as the Autism and Behavioral Science program, Behavioral Sciences and Technology, and or education in psychology, child and youth work, or early childhood education. These individuals may be registered behavioral technicians, or RBTs, or even BCABAs or BCBAs in training. Again, experience is really important for these individuals, and the hope is they've acquired minimum a year delivering services under the supervision of a clinical supervisor or senior therapist. Finally, it is recommended that these individuals also have an up-to-date vulnerable sector screening check, professional liability insurance, and adhere to a code of ethical and professional conduct. So if the clinical supervisor is the team coach or captain, the frontline therapists are the team players, and it's important to understand the different roles of these individuals and how they interact with the clinical supervisor. First, the senior therapist operates under the direct supervision of the clinical supervisor. In this role, the clinical supervisor may delegate some of their responsibilities related to the design, development, and supervision of the behavior plan. However, these activities are carried out under the supervision of the clinical supervisor, and the clinical supervisor retains responsibility for these services. For example, your child may require extensive direct supervision on a weekly basis. Your clinical supervisor may delegate some of this responsibility to the senior therapist, and your child's senior therapist may observe your child weekly while your clinical supervisor observes your child monthly. Next, The ABA therapists directly implement the behavioral services under the supervision of the clinical supervisor and senior therapist, if applicable. ABA therapists must be properly selected, trained, and supervised by the clinical supervisor and, if applicable, the senior therapist. The heart of the tiered model of behavioral service delivery is effective supervision. In order for your team to provide effective ABA services, a number of important supervision activities must occur. Some of these activities are direct, meaning they will involve your clinical team working directly with your child and or yourself. Examples of these activities may include the clinical supervisor and or senior therapist directly observing treatment implementation, and assessing treatment fidelity and quality, and ensuring all the frontline therapists are running the programs and collecting data properly. It may also include observation of your child to ensure that he or she is appropriately engaged in intervention. During direct supervision, your clinical supervisor may also review written programs and data while observing the implementation of those programs. In addition to direct supervision, there are numerous indirect supervision activities. These activities take place away from the direct treatment and include activities such as developing treatment goals and written plans, analyzing and summarizing data, adjusting programs and protocols based on the results of data analysis, coordinating care with other services, and completing progress or transition reports, and finally, providing training to staff. As you can see, there are more indirect than direct supervision activities. So how much supervision should your child receive? The amount of supervision your child receives will vary based on your child's needs and the complexity of their behavior plan. Factors that impact supervision amount include the dosage or number of hours of service your child receives, issues related to your child's health and safety, your child's rate of progress, if your child is experiencing difficulty making gains, or if your child is progressing quickly. Both of these necessitate lots of time spent revising and expanding their program. The general standard for supervision is approximately 2 hours per week for every 10 hours of direct treatment provided, keeping in mind that this time is split between the clinical supervisor and the senior therapist and between direct and indirect activities. As supervision is very much the heart of the tiered model of service delivery, parents should be prepared to be involved in supervision, and there are many ways that parents can really effectively aid in their child's programming and participate in supervision. These include things like preparing questions for your clinical supervisor and senior therapist, discussing concerns related to your child's progress and behavior within treatment and in the home or in the community, and updating the team on any new concerns or family goals and priorities. For example, if your child has started removing their seatbelt in the car or they've started flopping while walking in the community, this is great information to share with your team as they may be able to help you address these challenges. If your child was recently seen by another professional and you have updates on their physical health, educational progress, or new targets other therapists are working on, this should also be shared with your clinical team. For example, if your child is seeing an occupational therapist and they have tips for helping your child write or feed themselves, this information is very helpful. Perhaps some of the most important things parents can do, or one of the most important things parents can do, is be willing and available to participate in hands-on coaching in order to learn effective ways to teach new skills and manage challenging behaviors outside of treatment hours. Finally, if your clinical team requests that you collect data, this should be a parent priority, even though we know it is really hard to do while managing all your responsibilities as a parent. However, behavior analysts are required to use data to make decisions, so delays in data collection can result in delays in treatment planning and progress. We hope this information has been helpful to you and enhances your understanding of the Ontario Autism Program, good ABA services, and the necessary qualifications and roles and responsibilities of clinical supervisors and their ABA teams. As Cara Beth mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, here are the resources and references alluded to in the slides. At this time, we are more than happy to take questions from listeners on the line.
So hi everybody, I'm Catherine Buchan. I'm the Education Materials Coordinator for Autism Ontario, and I know we've got a lot of people that have registered and are watching the webinar right now. We've had some terrific questions come in. I'm just going to take a little bit of time so we can get to your questions to give everybody that's sitting around the table and on the phone an opportunity to introduce themselves and just say where they're from, and just let you know that they'll be taking these questions that you've been asking us throughout the webinar. And Julie, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you. I'm J.Koudys, and I'm a psychologist and a behavior analyst in private practice, as well as an assistant professor in the Department of Applied Disability Studies at Brock University. And I've had the good opportunity to be a part of a number of ONTABA's different committees and working groups, one of which was the chair of the Ontario Scientific Expert Committee for the Treatment of Autism Spectrum Disorders. And I'm happy to be here today.
Yeah, we're so happy too. Welcome.
So I'm C.Zorzos. I'm a psychologist and board-certified behavior analyst from Dalton Associates, and I'm the ONTABA chair of the ASD task force.
Welcome, Carabeth.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nancy Freeman. I'm a psychologist and I practice in behavior analysis. I'm with the Toronto Autism Services at Surrey Place Centre, and I'm adjunct faculty in the Graduate Psychology Department at York University.
All right, welcome, Nancy.
And I'm L.Campbell. I am a professor and coordinator in the Honours Bachelor of Behavioral Psychology program at St. Lawrence College in Kingston. I also have extensive experience in both private and public practice in Ontario, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst.
Yeah, so we're so excited to have all of you today with all of your differing perspectives. We'll get right in and start with the first question. What are some of the examples of ABA parent training?
That's a really good question. So there's a lot of different opportunities for parent training within both private practices and in the regional programs. So we offer things like Triple P, which is positive parent program for helping parents understand how to manage behavior. Impact, which often involves parents with little ones learning how to engage with their children. Special topics as identified by parents, so things like nutrition, toileting, sleep. And so we would certainly want to encourage parents to contact their single point of access to find out what the opportunities are in their community for clinics, workshops, and a lot of training.
Mm-hmm. And it's similar in private practice as well. So there are a lot of topic-specific opportunities, a lot around things like toileting, sleeping, and some of those general issues that may come up with children in that level.
Okay, great. So the second question has something to do with mental health. And Julie, I'm going to toss it over to you. The question is, what about mental health? Is it a focus of the Ontario Autism Program?
Currently, mental health is not a focus of the Ontario Autism Program. However, we do know that youth with ASD are more likely to experience mental health challenges and need supports and service in this area. For that reason, we would encourage parents to really talk with their family support worker, to talk with their clinical supervisor, who will refer them then to appropriate service providers in their community.
Okay, that's good to know. Lots of questions about the wait list.
Sure.
Nancy, so how long does a child usually take to be approved for the Ontario Autism Program and then just taken off the wait list in service?
So one of the really nice things with the transformation we've had is there isn't an approval process. So folks who've maybe been around in the system for a while might remember for our little ones there was an eligibility screening process where children had to be deemed eligible to receive IBI. The government removed that, and now any child with a confirmed written diagnosis automatically is approved.
Right.
So that barrier has been removed by the government. The system really, it's in a huge state of transformation. We're in pretty early days, I would say, of understanding the impact of these really important changes that have been made to the system to improve services for children, youth, for families. We all absolutely want children to get the services they need as quickly as possible. One of the things that we're going to need to understand better is how the behavior plans work in this new transformed system. So we know each behavior plan can be for up to 6 months. For many goals that children have, they'll actually be able to achieve them within that 6-month period. But for some of the goals, the children may need another 6-month behavior plan. We're going to have to see how that affects the flow of service, and that will affect when children get in. I don't know if you were wanting to add more, Carabeth?
No, I think that covers it. I think it's, we are in that phase of transformation right now, and we will know more as.
Yeah. Okay. So Laura, this is a question that, I was going to pass over to you. Is it necessary to have 20 to 40 hours of ABA per week when their child's in kindergarten?
Yeah, great question. So I think it's important to note that the level of intensity required for any child or youth with autism is determined by an individualized assessment. And part of this assessment is a conversation with the family and the school to see, how school's going, to identify the risks and benefits of pulling children from school. It's important to note that one thing to consider is the fact that children with ASD have a social communication disorder. So you need to evaluate the impact of withdrawal from school on the development of these skill areas. Finally, we'd want to look at the goal areas determined by the assessment and determine the appropriate time and location that is conducive to meeting the needs of the child. So what's important to remember is that our goal is to maximize the learning opportunities for all children across learning environments.
Yeah, thank you. So, Carabeth, Laura talked a little bit about that sort of balance between ABA programming and then community partners. We had another question that came in here. Are there some guidelines about what the collaboration should look like between the OAP and community partners? So daycare, SLP, other sort of supportive programming areas.
Right. So there are definitely parameters and guidelines in the OAP guidelines and in the OAP clinical framework. So the expectation is that when a child enters OAP, they're going to have access to a family support worker. And part of their role is developing that family service plan. And in that plan will be outlined what the interprofessional collaboration looks like. That can be coordinated by that family support worker as well. And what that will look like is having them connect with the larger family service team for each service that child or youth is in. So, for example, if a child is in school, they would want to reach out to the teacher, the CERT, the EA, other individuals who are working with them. If they're occupational therapists, speech and language pathologists, physicians, daycare staff, it would really depend on who is involved, and they would be invited to participate within that process, for sure.
Okay. That's terrific. And so, another really sort of strong theme that's come out is around qualifications and criteria. So this question asks, when we come into service, if we go into the direct service model, do we still need to make sure that these qualifications or criteria are met by the provider?
So again, another really great question. Absolutely. So all clinical supervisors who are overseeing the program will be signing off on the clinical supervisor attestation. And really the goal is to have high-quality service regardless of who your provider is. We're really happy to have a system where families can choose. Are they going with a single point of access? Are they going with a partner agency? Are they going with a private practice? And they're able to select the option that works best for their child or the family. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that would be true in the case of direct funds.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that the goal when the program was developed was to have universal and consistent guidelines across both DFO and DSO options.
Okay. All right, that's terrific. So we're going to make sure that everybody here at the table and on the phone gets a copy of the questions that have been submitted for today's webinar. There have been some great questions that have come in. We're also planning to do a second webinar based on some of the things that have come out so it can be helpful and ongoing for viewers and people listening on the phone today. I'm Catherine, and on behalf of everyone at Autism Ontario, we thank you so much for tuning in and talk to you soon.